Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As you know, it's just after 8:30 and we're live from the studios of British Muslim TV here in Wakefield in West Yorkshire with this week's edition of Questions with me, your host, Mohammed Shafiq. We're broadcasting Sky Channel 752 and across social media at British Muslim TV. I should really put my teeth in. Wherever you are joining us around the world, a very warm welcome. We want to hear from you tonight. We want to see your comments on the big stories we're covering tonight. You can call us now on 01924 231 083. You can message us on the WhatsApp number, which is on the screen now. And if you're watching this on Facebook or Twitter, post your comments in the chat box and we'll read some of them later. Tonight, we first head to Seattle in the United States to talk to a leading Muslim voice, Imam Jamal Rahman, about Sufism, interfaith, and how hate can be conquered. Then we head to London to talk to one of the leading human rights advocates in the world. Shadjareh, founder and chair of the Islamic Human Rights Commission, talks about his life of service, human rights around the world, and his thoughts on life for Muslims in 2022. So we want to hear from you tonight. You can call us now on 01924 231 083. Your messages on British Muslim TV across social media. Alternatively, you can send us a WhatsApp message. The number is on your screen. Now, the questions we're considering tonight. How important is interfaith in our modern societies? Human rights abuses go on. What can we do collectively as society to deal with them? And what does Islam say about those human rights? Please share your thoughts on 01924 231 083. Messages on WhatsApp or post on social media, and we'll read some of your comments throughout the program. Now, let's get started on the first story. Islam, Christianity and Judaism are all from the same Abrahamic tradition. Whilst the faiths differ on so much, there are some common bonds which often get forgotten in our polarized world. We often focus on what makes us different and what divides us. But is it time for us to focus on the bond that binds us together as part of the Abrahamic faiths? Does interfaith make your own faith weaker to the point you lose your religious identity? My next guest is part of a unique setup in the United States. They are called the Interfaith Amigos, a Muslim Imam, a Christian priest, and a Jewish rabbi coming together to focus on the things that are the same in all three faiths. Imam Jamal Rahman was born in Bangladesh, but has spent his life in the United States. He's a popular Muslim speaker around the world who has traveled to promote interfaith. Imam Jamal's passion is interfaith work. He's very much rooted in his own Islamic faith and is part of a Sufi path. Pleased to say Imam Jamal Rahman is joining us live on British Muslim TV from Seattle in the United States. Imam Jamal, a very warm welcome to the program. Thank you so much, sir, for honoring us with your presence.
I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, let's start at the beginning. Tell us about yourself and the work that you do.
Well, I wear two hats in Seattle. It's a full-time job. I am Muslim Imam in the Interfaith Community Sanctuary. I'm actually in the sanctuary right here. Behind me is the Qibla, the direction of Mecca. And here we foster a living, breathing interfaith community. That's half my work. The other half is working with my interfaith amigos. We got together after 9/11, 2001, a rabbi and a Christian pastor, and we, the Interfaith Amigos, we travel the country and sometimes overseas, sharing a message of inclusivity. That's our work.
Tell us about the Sufi tradition path that you follow. Millions around the world follow a path. I personally follow the Naqshbandi Tariqat. Tell us about your tradition.
You know, I come from a lineage in northern Bengal. I would just prefer to call it a spiritual path. Because in America, Sufism is almost it's a synonym of really not so much focusing on the theology or the intricacies of the theology, but focusing on the spirit of the tradition. So let me give you an example. You know, some conservative Muslims might say that if you don't do your prayers, 5 obligatory prayers, you will burn in hell. A Sufi or a spiritual Muslim will say that, you know, when you pray, it is as if you're attending a celestial banquet. And if you're not praying, you're simply missing out on that feast. So that's the approach we take, a spiritual approach. We call that Sufism.
Sufism. Now, many Muslims living in the West say 9/11 and the terrorist attacks which you alluded to changed their lives. I know personally that's true for me because I became an activist to oppose terrorism after 9/11 and July the 7th, the terrorist attacks here in the UK. Was that a turning point for you as well?
Yes, for us, it became very clear that people knew so little about Islam. So my work and that of my colleagues was really to have people realize and have an appreciative understanding of Islam. In fact, the great sages in Sufism and also from other traditions say, if you really want peace in a multi-religious society, it is your sacred duty to have an appreciative understanding of the other person's religion. It's not enough to say, I am non-biased, I am not prejudiced. The question that these Sufi masters would ask is, what are you non-biased about? Because what happens is, if I don't have an appreciative understanding or some spiritual literacy about the other tradition, then when some extremists or some other people commit some violence or some wrong, then we are inclined to judge the entire religion by the behavior of those people. So our main work was really in creating more of a religious and spiritual literacy.
Now, interfaith is often misunderstood. Can you explain, in your view and experience, what you think it actually is?
As a Muslim, I look at those verses in the Quran that says, where Allah says, if Allah wanted, Allah could have made all of us one single community. But God chose to create diversity for several reasons. One is, so you might come to know the other on a human level. And the other one is, if you have to compete in doing righteous deeds. So if I am not only acknowledging and being tolerant and honoring diversity, but celebrating diversity, I'm really fulfilling the injunction of the Quran. And of course, if I may get into some details, I and my Interfaith amigos and my congregants at the Interfaith Community Sanctuary, we talk about what is interfaith. And, we write about it, we speak about it. There are several stages. If I may just tell you that the two main stages, one is, if you want to practice interfaith, come to know the other on a human level. This is a Quranic injunction. And one more is, it doesn't matter what your religion, whether you have faith or no faith. If you want to practice interfaith, honor and celebrate diversity, I have to become a better human being. I have to do some spiritual practices to become more compassionate, more loving, more forgiving, more patient, more inclusive. So coming to know the other on a human level and simultaneously doing the work of becoming more of an insane kamil, a more perfected human being, is at the core of interfaith.
And what's the reaction been like from fellow Muslims in the United States?
After 9/11, not just Muslims, but all the different houses of worship became aware that it is critical to have an appreciative understanding of other religions if we want peace in a multi-religious society, and more critically, to reach out to the other. So now mosques all over America have programs where consciously, deliberately, regularly, persistently, we are reaching out to other communities. And this is essential.
Okay, well, we're going to come in very closely to the break, and what we'll do, we'll take a very quick break and then we'll continue our conversation. But I just want to ask you one more question.
Yes.
In a sense, you think that we have more in common together than what divides us, despite our differences?
Absolutely. We have, if you talk about the Abrahamic faiths, the Muslims, Jews, and Christians, we are cousins. But of course, we are cousins of a very, very, very dysfunctional family. And if we have differences, not differences, but if another kind of commonality, and this is what actually gives us many invitations to speak everywhere, we also talk about where in each of our tradition we go astray. the institution of a religion goes astray, not in your religion, my religion. We want to look at that. And that is what actually gives us, as I said, openings to visit different places and speak about it.
And that self-reflection is something which you, all three of you do? Or is that just something uniquely to what you do?
No, all three of us. We say, we have some problems in the institution of our religion. Let's be honest. Let's talk about it. And over these 2 decades that we have done work together, from the questions we have received, we have written 3 books together, and one book is called Religion Gone Astray. We have gone astray in the area of exclusivity, violence, unequal status of women, and homophobia. And we talk about that, all of us, in our tradition.
Well, really powerful conversation. Imam Jamal Rahman, you're going to stay with us. We're going to continue the conversation. You were joining us live there from the United States. And let me just give you some latest updates from Ukraine and Russia. The Ukrainian parliament has just voted to declare a state of emergency as fears grow of a full-scale Russian invasion. It will come into force at midnight Kiev time, and it will last at least beginning 30 days, according to a top security official. Now, it comes as the country is urging citizens, Ukraine is urging citizens that live in Russia to leave the country immediately, and Russia has withdrawn all its diplomats from the country as well. Now, we know that there are millions of Ukrainians who live in Russia, and obviously they have families in both countries. And according to the Ukrainian government, there are several of their government-based websites are now down, and they believe that's a target of an apparent cyber attack. And it's also conscripting reservists into the regular military as it braces itself for a possible invasion. And the United Kingdom government has also announced it will be providing greater military support to Ukraine in the form of defensive weapons and non-lethal aid. That's the latest from Ukraine. We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our important conversation with Imam Jamal Rahman. Welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV, live from our studios here in Wakefield. Now, we're taking your calls on 01924231083. You can get in touch with us on our social media handle, British Muslim TV. We have an exclusive conversation with Imam Jamal Rahman, who's joining us live from Seattle in the United States. Now, before the break, Honourable Imam, we talked about how interfaith is often misunderstood or maligned. Do you think you lose elements of your own faith when you reach out to other faiths? Is that your own faith being diluted?
Good question. That's a very common question asked of us. We say, use your own being as the experiment. So I'm a Muslim, I'm rooted in Islam, and I find from my own experience that when I'm open to the beauty and wisdom of other traditions, this waters my Islamic roots, makes me a better Muslim and a more complete, developed human being. Which is why we say interfaith is not about conversion. It is about completion, becoming a more insane kamil, a more perfected, developed human being. Another point, a very famous professor, Houston Smith, the late Professor Houston Smith, one of the world's greatest expert on comparative religion, who was a United Methodist minister and also who practiced the salat, did the prayers. He said it's like this. You can look at the Quran, let's say, from one angle, but if you look at it from other angles also, through the lens of other religions, you have a much more deeper understanding of the Quran. So interfaith study is very enriching and very ennobling.
And then when you look at the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, what do you learn about interfaith from his time and his example?
He interacted with all the traditions. Look at the Treaty of Medina. It was so inclusive. You know, when he used to receive delegations of Christians and Jews, and sometimes those conversations lasted over several nights, he would tell those Jewish and Christian delegations, please do your Sunday service, do your Shabbat in the mosque, because his famous words are, it's simply a place consecrated to God. And also, let's not forget, the Prophet Muhammad in his lifetime, he had 2 Jewish wives and also a Christian wife. It is very important for us to remember that.
Okay, so one of the questions we've been asked on social media is how do you, for example, deal with disagreements? Let's take, for example, Israel and Palestine, the recent violence there last year, which were challenging time for both communities here in the UK, maybe in the United States, or US foreign policy. Oh, there is a disagreement. How do you get over that barrier?
That's a very good question. There's a very common complaint about interfaith, particularly in the Abrahamic interfaith, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, that they get together very infrequently, very minimal number of times. And what happens is they say, when you get together only in those infrequent times, the behavior is absurdly nice. But the moment people go home, Muslims become terrorists, Jews become occupiers, Christians become liars, unless, and this is the key, unless there is more of a frequency, a greater number of times these people from different faiths get together, they establish a personal relationship, then the conversation continues. Now you might say, and people do say, okay, Jamal, the rabbi and the pastor, you have become friends, so you have good conversations. How does it affect the Arab-Israeli conflict? Well, the truth is, my Jewish friends tell me that when these conversations started between Muslims and Jews particularly, and also Christians, and they didn't talk about the elephant in the room, some of them continued meeting, had frequent get-togethers, became friends, and this has become the basis, the source of these lobbying groups in the United States called J Street Lobby, Jewish Voices for Peace, that are really changing foreign policy in America because both sides have listened to one another. And this has come from these frequent interfaith get-togethers.
So you have to talk about the elephant in the room. Do you talk about the elephant in the room?
All the time, all the time. And this is what really, as I said earlier, gives us invitations to go everywhere. We say, let's talk about where our own religion goes astray. For example, the biggest one is exclusivity. My rabbi friend will stand up and say, chosen people. My Christian brother will stand up and say, the only way. I, as a Muslim, will stand up in these presentations and say, we Muslims, we believe your books are divine, but of course you corrupted them, you politicized them, but we Muslims, we finally got it right. Having this holier than thou attitude, you see.
I like that.
So yes, we talk about the difficulties in our own tradition, very honestly, not just to criticize, but to shine a higher light and how we can go beyond that. This wonderful sage Rumi says, a bee and a wasp, they drink from the same flower. One produces nectar, other one produces a sting. It depends on our intention and level of consciousness.
Yeah. Now, I was really moved by the 3 amigos, the interfaith amigos, as you are labeled. Tell us a bit about your fellow amigos.
Yes. Well, we met after 9/11, and we just met to do some programs. And that's when we realized that, we are cousins, and we became friends. And that was when we truly understood that the key to overcoming polarization is to create the environment where, as the Quran says, you come to get to know the other. So when we came to get to know the other, we found that We had so much in common, as you were saying, in the core teachings of each of our tradition: oneness, unconditional love, compassion. And then as we honestly began to speak about the difficulties, not in your tradition, in my tradition, then we began to write books. We began to have a radio program on interfaith. And then the New York Times gave us a full-page article when they got to know about our work. And that really gave us a lot of exposure. And I think we are still dining out on that, getting invitations.
And, you know, it's great that you do all this very important, serious work. What about, how do you relax with them? Do you have social gatherings? Do you get together as families? Tell us a bit about that.
Yes. Our families have become the best of friends. Our congregations have gotten together, and we are very relaxed, and we introduce a lot of humor in our presentation. So, for example, you know, we'll tell the story of the same story in each of our tradition. God comes down and reveals certain basic truths to the people, to some people. God comes down and reveals certain basic truths to some special people. But then the devil comes along and says, let me organize that for you. And that becomes religion. So we joke about that. Another very famous or very popular story among us is from the Mullah Nasruddin series, you know, the Muslim Mullah. So this is one story we tell in most of our presentations, where the mullah goes to work, lunchtime opens his lunch pail box. What does he find? A cheese sandwich. Second day, third day, fourth day, it's always a lousy cheese sandwich. And then when the 10th day mullah complains, I'm getting sick and tired of this lousy cheese sandwich, his co-workers say, Mullah, why don't you ask your wife, be convincing, to make you a different kind of sandwich? I'm not married. Who makes them? I do. So that gives us an introduction to talk about human nature, the ego, and about opening up the heart. So we introduce a lot of humor in our presentations.
You talked a bit about the strong reaction from the community and certainly from the media and that New York Times. But what's the negative reaction been? Because there are forces in the United States who want to pull communities apart, in all communities, on the far right, within the margins of the Muslim community as well. How do you react to that?
Well, we have a lot of opposition for people who believe this challenges the core belief that they are the chosen people. It is the only way. My book is superior to yours. In some cases, we've had the police come to protect the particular place we were speaking at. But you know, most people realize this is very beautiful work. In fact, the majority of people, I'll give an instance. Sometimes we have huge groups we are speaking to. There's a lot of lights. We cannot see what is going on. But when the lights become less harsh, we see that the people in the front rows, they're crying. Not because our presentation was so beautiful, but because they realize that these are three people from three different traditions, and they can sense intuitively that we have become good friends. And this gives them so much hope that through friendship, one can really overcome all those polarization, the demonization of the other.
Sadly, we're really, I could listen to you all night, sir. You know, we've got very little time. And I just wanted to say my final question to you. For our viewers watching this here in the United Kingdom, but around the world as well, what's your message about interfaith?
You know, I will quote Hans Kung, a very famous Swiss theologian who recently passed away. You know, he would say that interfaith is not just a matter of hospitality. It is a matter of our survival. And I would say, as a Muslim studying the Quran, this particular insight by Islamic spiritual teachers, that they would say, Jamal, if your relationship with your holy book or your religion comes in the way of your relationship with the other who is outside your tribe, then for sure it will come in the way of your relationship with God.
Oh, it's a powerful way to end the program. I hope we can get your fellow amigos on maybe in the future. Maybe we can set up a call for all three of you to join us.
We would love that.
Absolutely. We'll stay in touch. Thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you.
My love to you and your family, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We reached the end of our time there together with Imam Jamal Rahman joining us live on British Muslim TV from Seattle in the United States. And hopefully we'll set that up. Let's get the priest. Let's get the rabbi as well. And we'll have the Imam. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to take a very quick break. When we come back, we're going to head to London for a conversation with the chair of the Islamic Human Rights Commission, Masood Shadjareh. Join us on the other side of these very important messages. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV, live from our studios here in Wakefield. We're taking your calls now on 01924 231 083 or get in touch with us on our social media handle, British Muslim TV. Now let's move on to our next topic and guest. Human rights are often talked about around the world, but how vocal that voice is depends on geopolitical interest, who the abuser is, and what their position is in the international community. The accusation is that the world in reality is not very equal when it comes to human rights. Let me give you a few examples. Let's take Pakistan, which has strong economic ties with China, who in turn have been accused of human rights abuses of the Uyghur Muslim minorities. Pakistan remains silent on China's role in that abuse, while asking the world to condemn human rights abuses in Indian-held Kashmir. The United States and its allies, like the United Kingdom, have been accused of standing always with Israel, no matter what they are accused of. Israel continues their occupation of Palestinian lands and has been accused by the international community of war crimes in Gaza. Obviously, an allegation that they deny. Western allies remain silent when Palestinian lives are killed and try to defend the actions, but want you to focus on the human rights abuses around the world, like in Ukraine, in Turkey, or in African or Asian countries. Saudi Arabia and its Gulf allies speaking out with human rights abuses in Syria, but silent in Yemen, Egypt, Bahrain. I hope you get the picture I'm trying to paint. Now, one man has been a powerful voice for human rights for decades, often accused of being an apologist for terrorists by newspapers with powerful interest. This has not deterred him, and still in 2022, he remains that powerful voice. Masood Shadjareh is the chair and founder of the Islamic Human Rights Commission. Pleased to say Masood is joining us live on British Muslim TV from London. Masood, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Very warm welcome to the program. It's a great honor to have you on my program.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. It's really a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much.
The viewers.
Thank you, sir. First of all, just tell us a bit about the Islamic Human Rights Commission.
Well, we started the Islamic Human Rights Commission 25 years ago, almost, within a month's time. It's going to come to 25th anniversary. At that time, there were a group of us activists and campaigners. We saw, even before 9/11, we saw what was happening was every time anything went bang, the fingers were pointing at Muslims. While in the same time, our research shows that 85% of those who are oppressed around the world are Muslim, be it Bosnia, Chechnya, Kashmir, and Palestine, and indeed in many Muslim countries. Some of the victims were victims of fellow Muslims, and some of them were victims of others. But the reality is that 85% of the oppressed people, according to the even UN figures at that time, were Muslim. And we felt that something needs to be done. We really need to set up an organization which supports the victims and in the same time exposes this sort of fallacy that Muslims are creator of problems. If you remember sort of Oklahoma bombing, that was before 9/11. And as soon as the bomb went out, the whole papers in Britain, in the United States, and were articulating that is this a Islamic bomb and Muslims are behind it. And we know it was now, a few days later, we became aware that it was sort of white supremacist. that was sort of exemplifying what was going on. And we actually felt that we should do this as Muslims. For the first few days when we set up the organization, it was known as the Human Rights Commission. And then we actually decided that, no, we really need to do this for everyone. Not just, we are not a human rights organization for Muslims. We are a human rights organization standing for all, justice for all. But we are undoubtedly Muslims, and we are motivated by our belief in Islam and our deen to do this.
Often when you're on the media, we don't get to ask these questions. I'd really love to know our viewers to know, who know you and know your work. Where did you grow up? What was growing up like? What was your upbringing like?
Well, not many people know. I mean, many people know that I was born in Iran. But I left Iran when I was 16, and I went to the United States for education. And after a few years, I came to Britain. So really, most of my life, I have actually sort of lived in the West. And really, my life changed at the time when it was late 60s and 70s, when I was at Berkeley as a first year on a degree, studying electrical engineering from all the things. But all the campaigns and all the sort of riots for Vietnam and anti-racism and so forth really had such an impact on me that really changed my way of life. I left shortly after that, came to Britain, and I changed from science into social and really changed my life. I became a campaigner for justice. And really, that was a sort of a great impact on my life. Then after sort of Vietnam, was South Africa, and being involved against apartheid, and even those times we were being marked as being pro-terrorist and so forth. Nelson Mandela was identified as a terrorist. So I've seen all that happening before. So really, when you stand up for what is right and what is just against the temperature of the time, you're really gonna get labeled. And look at even now with a recent report of Human Rights Watch and Amnesty regarding Palestine, how they're being targeted. Human rights activists will be targeted, and that is unfortunately part and parcel of the business, really.
Now, we're going to talk after the break about human rights and some of those issues in some of those countries later on. But what drives you to do your human rights work? Because it can be quite lonely. It's very public. For as long as I've been in the media, I can remember sharing studios with you and hearing your voice on the radio, the TV. And you often get criticized not just by your opponents, but also by people within the Muslim community. What still drives you to continue to do your work?
Well, you see, this is funny. Human rights, when it comes to sort of Islam and Muslims, it's got two extreme sort of views. Some people say human rights has got nothing to do with Islam, and then others they say that the creation of Human Rights Declaration of the UN, all we have to do is massage a couple of words in it, and then put a Bismillah on top of it, and Alhamdulillah at the end of it, and becomes Islamic. The reality is that really Islamic concept of human rights, Islamic concept of justice, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that be witness against the rich, against the poor, against your family, against yourself. Basically the concept of justice is so important that you're commanded to even be witness against yourself and say the truth. And the other thing is that in Islam, when, the rest of the world was still in a barbaric sort of era. In Islam, the due process and Sharia, legality and due process, very important, is being enshrined in our Sharia. And when you look at examples of the companions of the Prophet and the Prophet ﷺ, you look at the Khulafai Rashidin, look at, for example, what happened to the fourth Khalifa when he was assassinated in Kufa after the Fajr prayer, and the asylum was apprehended, and he was being brought out of the masjid, and he saw the hand of this murderer had been tied so tight, and he actually said stop, and he made a very famous speech that comes in different variation, but the gist of it is that he said that if I live, I will stand in judgment over him. If I did not live, you stand in judgment. And you have to understand that this speech is being told to all the eyewitnesses to the murder. They saw exactly what happened. They saw the murder with their own eyes. But nevertheless, Ali radiallahu anhu says that, look, you have to judge him. You have to go through the process. And if you find him guilty, don't abuse him. And he even says that you have got his hands too tight, loosen them, don't abuse him. So even the murderer of the Khulafai Rashidin has got right. So everyone has got right. The due process is so essential in Islam that no one should be should be denied that due process, and only going through due process and being found guilty, then the punishment is exactly what is adhered for that. And person should not be abused. Even a murderer going to gallows to be executed should not be abused. And if it does, then it will ask for qasas, both there and the day of judgment. These concepts are so powerful that we are not there to give judgment and justice just to our friends. Even our enemies, we are demanded to give justice to them. And that's very powerful.
It's very powerful indeed. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. You've been very generous with your time, so we're very grateful. We've got you till the end of the program. I just want to give you the latest from Ukraine. Separatist leaders are now asking President Putin for help in repelling what they claim is Ukrainian aggression in a potentially major development. President Putin is saying that he is, we'll come back to what President Putin says in a second, but what we're saying is that the Ukrainian parliament has just voted for an emergency law, and that comes into force at midnight local time. We'll talk a bit about that as well, keep you updated as it happens. We'll take a break, we'll come back and continue our conversation with Masood. Join us on the other side of these very important messages. Don't go anywhere. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV. My special guest tonight is Masood Shadjareh, who is the chair and founder of Islamic Human Rights Commission. We were just talking about his upbringing and his thoughts about human rights and the Islamic Human Rights Commission. Brother Masood, I just wanted to ask you very briefly, if we may, about the Nationality and Borders Bill. This is something we've been covering on my program for a few weeks now. You know you're involved in the Cross Community Group. What's your views about this bill, and why are you fearful about the consequences of it?
Well, the problem with this bill, or the concept of it, goes back to many years. Really, is in 2007, for first time, a law was passed to remove one's nationality, and it was at the time of the Labour government. But very few people were denied this nationality. It was really brought in on the sort of premises that there are very extreme individuals, basically from the Muslim community, that there is nothing you could do to them except sort of getting rid of them from this country. It was really never based on a concept of justice, because justice means that if someone is found guilty and proven guilty, then need to sort of forego the penalty for that, and be it imprisonment or any other aspect. And we opposed that at the time. And but the mood was as such that was passed. But in the recent years, in 2017 alone, we had 104 people sort of had their nationality removed from them. Some of them don't have even second nationality. So indeed is unlawful according to international law. And then it has become now with the new sort of proposal is that not only this will be removed, it will be a decision of a minister, and the minister could make that decision and just sign the piece of paper and put it inside in a sort of drawer without announcing it, without actually informing the person who suddenly and apparently has their nationality removed. And this is lawful. You know, if we get a parking ticket, before that could be enforced upon us, we have the right of actually going to court to challenge it. If we fail to challenge it and get justice, or if we challenge it and we were found guilty, then the penalty kicks in. Here, nationality of someone. And nationality of who? Only people with a brown skin, people from sort of background, first, second, 20 generation back. Those are the ones who this law affects them. It's been estimated 5 million people are affected. As the reality is that is actually the number is much higher than that. And what this law means is that there is two types of nationality. One for the white British person who, no matter what he does, it could be a serial killer, but will not be deported. And another one for the rest of us who come from sort of other parts of the world, and be it first generation, second generation, or even 20 generation, we are going to have a second-class citizenship.
But I was just going to ask you that the government would response to that would be that this is only for the most serious cases of going and fighting for ISIS or other terrorist entities and becoming an enemy of the United Kingdom. Isn't this another tool to protect the United Kingdom and its citizens?
No, it isn't, because if it's a tool to sort of address people who are breaking the law or abusing the law, then, you know, with all means, take them to court and find them guilty. And you know, we always were told that terrorists should not be sort of deported because they will go somewhere else and continue the terrorism. Terrorism, it goes beyond borders. We always been told that, you know, we need to respond to terrorism, not just within Britain, but worldwide, because a terrorist from here will go elsewhere and commit acts of terrorism. We should stop them. We shouldn't just send them out and so they could get on with it, first of all. Secondly, we've got cases right now. We got one case of someone being accused of spying. And, you know, when he left the country on a trip, on his return, they stopped allowing him to come back. And they say, you're a spy. Now, spies were always, what I remember, always, the government and the intelligence services always tried to stop spies running away once they found out. Here, we actually accommodating to send the spies to where they spied for. And this makes it madness. It really is crazy. It really just feeding the racism and those who white supremacies within Britain who actually want to have a two-tiers system of citizenship. So we are not just subject to the queen, but we are subject to the white person. And that really is the heart of it, because we are not saying don't take him to court. If there is evidence, take him to court, find them guilty, lock them away, and throw away the key. But the fact of the matter is that this thing that is minister could make a decision and on a secret evidence. For example, this guy I was telling you regarding being accused of being a spy, when they went to court, the government presented and said, we cannot give evidence because it's all secret. This is what the fascist sort of government of past were involved in, not a modern sort of democracy which believes in due process.
Okay. And what impact do you think this will have on ethnic minority communities in this country?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
What impact will this have on ethnic minority communities in the UK?
Well, already we feel that we are second-class citizens. If you ask, our viewers, many of them have experiences that directs them to think that they're second-class citizens, be it when they are trying to actually get employment or housing or access to the law, etc., etc. Now it's official. We're going to be treated by different standards of legality than our sort of indigenous population.
Okay, we're going to move on very quickly because we want to talk about, and time is running fast. I don't know where it goes, Masood, but let's talk about your thoughts. You mentioned the Amnesty International report on the Israeli treatment of the Palestinians, and they described it as apartheid, which the Israeli government have rejected. What would you say about that report and the response from the Israelis?
Well, look, first of all, an apartheid system, be it South Africa or Israel, they're never going to accept the fact that they're apartheid system. They will fight it because they're apartheid, because they are bullying their own citizens who come from different backgrounds. This is nothing new. I remember in 2001, the racism conference of UN in Durban, the NGO forum, which was a huge gathering from all around the world, voted to identify Israel as an apartheid racist state. Since then, we have been seeing evidence, further evidence, the way this apartheid system works. B'Tselem, which is a Jewish Israeli human rights organization, identified it. Human Rights Watch have done it. We have done it. Amnesty have done it. There is no doubt that, and UN special rapporteurs, Richard Falk, identified it as an apartheid system. There is no doubt that this is an apartheid system. But the fact is this, that, international community, under the sort of leadership of US and European nations, are not allowing this truth to come out and to address this injustice. But again, this is nothing new.
But the reality, sorry, I'm just going to ask you that, because the reality is that there is discrimination against Israeli Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, but they also have some rights in Israel.
Yeah, well, even the blacks in South Africa has some rights, but it wasn't equal rights. We are talking about different roads for Palestinian and non-Palestinian, different number plates, when it comes to water, when it comes to building their homes, the demolition of their homes. Right now, day by day, people are being thrown off their homes, which they have lived in for generations. No Israeli Jew has been thrown out of their home. This is very clearly an apartheid system with the apartheid wall, with the apartheid legislations in power. And just to turn around and have legislation, which we had in recent years of saying that this is a Jewish state and Jews have got more right than others. This is an apartheid system.
Okay,
but the point is this, that even South Africa, I don't know if you remember that Margaret Thatcher said Nelson Mandela was a terrorist and identified him as a terrorist. And those of us who were supporting the sort of campaign against the apartheid system in South Africa were being demonized. And it took a long time before justice was implemented. And when it did, it wasn't the case that we throw out the white people of South Africa out into the sea. What we saw was the beginning of a justice that people of all backgrounds could live together. And this is exactly what we want in occupied Palestine.
Now, the Israeli government would disagree with your description of their system. They say there are many rights for Israeli Arabs. And even this week, there was an Israeli Arab appointed to the Supreme Court and says that, yes, there is discrimination, and as there is in any society. But I do want to delve a bit more into that report and your reaction to that report. We're going to take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll have that conversation. We'll open the lines as well on 01924 231 083. So if you've got a question on anything Masood is saying, please do pick up that phone. But alternatively, you can get in touch with us on social media at the chat box if you're watching on Facebook Live, and also on Twitter and other social media platforms. Join us on the other side of these very important messages. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV. We've got an exclusive conversation with the chair and founder of Islamic Human Rights Commission, Shadjareh, who's joining us live from London. We were talking about the Amnesty International report, which described the treatment of the Palestinians by the Israeli state as apartheid. And the Israeli government is describing as anti-Semitism because Israel is the only country around the world that is singled out for this sort of criticism. Masood, I mean, the real sense is that there is just getting that there is a sense that Israeli Arabs have rights, and therefore you can't describe a system where Israeli Arabs have Israeli passports and participate in Israeli elections and are now in government in Israel as an apartheid system. Is it important to distinguish between what is happening in Israel and what is happening in the occupied Palestinian territories?
The fact of the matter is that Israeli Arabs, as known, those who have got citizenship, are better off than those who live in Gaza and West Bank. But they are subjected to restriction in a different standard to the Israeli Jews. So there is apartheid even plays out in that level. Different roads, different rights of traveling. If they travel and then they try after 2 years coming back, their rights will be taken away from them. This is not something that we could just turn around and say, just because one group of people have got a slightly more right than others, then it's equal. Equality is not there. Even number plates are different. The house demolition, right of building in their own land. Many Palestinians still carry the key to the front door of their house, which are not able to go to it. While Jews from all around the world are invited, financed to come and live in their lands and in their homes. These are, the annexation against international law, be it the Jerusalem or Golden Heights or anywhere else. We are, there is no doubt whatsoever that this is an apartheid system. It also, there's no doubt that this is illegal occupation, which under international law is unacceptable. Right now, we are, we are seeing what is happening, the relationship with Russia, and then United States is screaming that you cannot sort of recognize this because this is an occupied land and is against international law. Well, the United States accepts the illegal occupation of Golden Heights. Yeah. It accepts the illegal occupation of Jerusalem, and this is against international law. Why we are not hearing any voices? International law has become a sort of a tool of, just using it against your opponent. Unfortunately, even human rights has become that tool. We see that opponents of the United States and the West are being accused of all sorts of human rights abuses, but their supporters like Saudi Arabia and so forth could get away with murder.
Okay, we're going to talk about Saudi Arabia and the wider Middle East after the break, but I just wanted to explore this a bit further. Now, in this report, Amnesty International report, it also set out what it called as terrorism, the attacks against innocent Israelis from attack by Palestinians in the West Bank and the rocket attacks, which they call war crimes, from Gaza into Israel. What would you say about that element of the report?
Well, there are elements in that report which is really problematic. And they refuse to deal with the issue of illegal occupation. They actually say they're not going to touch on that. You can't sort of ignore the illegal occupation because under the international law, if you are illegally occupied, then those who are occupied have got the right of fighting and taking arms against their illegal occupation. This is actually international law. This is not what I'm trying to make it. And the fact of the matter is that if you ignore the illegal occupation, then you look at in a different sets of circumstances. Palestinians, in the same way that the French resistance fought against Nazis, they have got the right to fight against their occupiers. And this is part and parcel of international law. If you turn around and say, I don't want to talk about illegal occupation, then you're looking at the different sets of rules. And this is what that report, unfortunately, have done.
But what about those rockets from Gaza into Israel? Wouldn't you condemn that as well?
Well, look, under international law, it's like just saying that would you condemn French resistance trying to fight the illegal occupation of Nazis? That's bizarre. It's illegal occupation that has created the conflict, not people fighting to free themselves. The reality is that if you look at the number of people who die, who are killed on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, you do understand very clearly that who is the oppressor and who is the oppressed. One of the most powerful armies in the Middle East, which has been supported financially and everything else by the West, is unleashed against the Palestinians who have got very limited way of defending themselves. We cannot deny this. These same arguments were being used regarding South Africa. I remember having these same arguments in media at that time, that people were saying, well, aren't you going to condemn the anti-apartheid movement for taking arms and taking, bombing places and so forth? The reality is that once it's proven there is apartheid, which is against international law, once it's proven that this is illegal occupation, then sets of rights for those who are fighting against those elements, it kicks in and it gives them the right to actually take arms against illegal occupation. And the apartheid system is unlawful under international law, and every nation needs to actually combat and get involved to remove the last apartheid system in our universe.
I've got one more question on this. I promise we'll move on and talk about other things because time is of the essence. What do you make about the ongoing division between the Palestinian groups? You've got Fatah, which is controlling the West Bank, and you've got Hamas controlling Gaza. What's your response? How can the Palestinian cause be progressed when there's so much division within Palestinian groups?
You know how much money and resources are put into trying to divide the Palestinians? It's the same resources, and probably more here than there was at the time of apartheid in South Africa. You know, we had these people, black South Africans who were working with the apartheid system to legitimize certain parts of South Africa and so forth. This is going to happen because the fact is that those who are committing these atrocities, those who are unleashing the apartheid system have got the resources. And indeed, this is the best option for them to divide and rule. But nevertheless, when it comes to the all Palestinians, and indeed going beyond Palestinians to people, ordinary people in that region, then the voice is very united. It is very clear that people are saying that this illegal occupation, this bully of the region needs to be stopped, and the apartheid system, the apartheid wall, and this sort of system needs to be unleashed to give a hope and chance for others to grow. This is not the voice of someone like me who is obviously motivated by Islam and so forth. I've got many companions and many friends from the Jewish community, from the Christian community, from the secular community. We all understand this, and we all are hoping and working to create a society in occupied Palestine where no more sort of Zionism, and people could live together and share equally and have the decisions that needed for creating a better future for all of them.
I can't believe it's the final break. We've got about 90 seconds. I just wanted to ask you very briefly, and we'll talk about President Macron and France and Europe, but what do you make of human rights across the European Union?
Well, I think I'm very concerned with the way that human rights or abuse of human rights is taking place. We got a situation now that unfortunately we are seeing more abuses, more racism, more sort of nationalism, and this concept of creating others as a means of uniting the majority together. This otherization, which right now we see being used against Muslims in India, in France, in Britain, and everywhere else, unfortunately, level of environment of hate against Muslims increasing tremendously in such a speed that is really worrying. I mean, I'm not exaggerating to say that these are signs that if we go down, sleepwalk down these routes, we are going to sort of see genocide taking place, because genocide happens when demonization takes place, be it at the time of Nazis or be it at the time of Bosnia-Herzegovina. That level of demonization eventually creates this environment of hate where neighbor will kill neighbor, where neighbor will rape neighbor, neighbor will slaughter the child of his neighbor. And that level of environment of hate, unfortunately, is what we are seeing being strengthened by politicians and media on a day in, day out basis. And really, we need to talk about this further, but we seem to have a sort of amnesia. We go from...
We're going to... Masood, we're going to come back to you. We're just going to go to our break, but as I said, really important conversation and developments going on in Ukraine as well, and we're going to talk about that as well, but very much about President Macron and the French president election, which are coming up. Join us on the other side of these very important messages. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq. We're in the last part of the program. We'll finish in about 15 minutes. So let's get back to our guest, Masood, from the Islamic Human Rights Commission. We were talking just before the break about Europe. Let's expand that. President Macron, who is facing an election, the first stage of the presidential election in April, lots of laws being changed, the right for Muslims to practice their faith. He would argue that it's to do with protecting the country from terrorism. What do you make of President Macron's record over the last 5 years on human rights for Muslims?
Well, he's operating in that environment of hate, which I sort of was arguing for. I mean, our reports, we have done reports, qualitative and quantitative surveys for Britain, for Germany, for France, actually 2 reports on each of these for California, for Canada, and they all identify that we are sleepwalking to this environment of hate. And this environment of hate, people, ordinary people, behave differently. And, we have seen even an example in Britain when somebody kicked a pregnant woman in the underground and was filmed and went to court. He was saying that he was embarrassed in front of his Muslim friends and others when he saw the footage of what he's done. This environment actually is so powerful that gets people to do things that they wouldn't do if this environment of hate wasn't there. Environment of hate is created by politicians and so forth. In France, you can't separate Macron from others who are standing up. They are competing with one another to see which one is more Islamophobe, to get sort of better sort of popularity. We had the same thing here. The Brexit was as a result of this sort of level of racism, that we don't want these foreigners here. And the day that people voted and we sort of decided on Brexit, it was reported that doctors and others were being approached in their surgery by their patient and say, why are you here? Now, we know that we need these communities to have a better and prosperous life. But the fact is that this environment of hate and this modernization, you create a group of people and say, these are the Muslims, these are the foreigners. If you want to have a better life, you just got to get rid of these and everything is going to be hunky-dory. The reality is that's not true. But that lie is being sold to people. And I think that's the sort of the basis that we are moving. This was exactly the same lies which were sold at the time of Nazis. It's the same lie which was sold out to people in former Yugoslavia. And you look at the stages which leads to genocide, you see that demonization and aggressive environment of hate is one of the stages. And it's very worrying that we are seeing this. Macron needs to compete with other Islamophobes. And it's got nothing to do with the reality. I mean, look at the way that the Daesh is being promoted. Daesh killed more Muslims than non-Muslims. Daesh was created in the area to actually kill Muslims. And it did so very vigorously, without any compassion. But there is an illusion that's been created that Daesh was against the West and Daesh was against Muslims, mainstream Muslims and people in that region, killed men, women, and children. And indeed, Muslims stood up against it and defeated it. We need to sort of understand that this environment of hate, this sort of demonization, this modernization, if we don't understand it and challenge it, then we all are affected. I mean, I want to tell our viewers, Muslim or not, this is not just about protecting the Muslims. We know when ethnic cleansing took place in former Yugoslavia or what happened in the genocide and the Holocaust in Germany affected everyone. It affected, people from all backgrounds. Everybody becomes a victim. We all need to come together to challenge this sort of barbaric modernization and racism and super nationalism, because it will divert us from real issues, and it will put us one against another, and we will suffer in many ways, both in the fact that this conflict is going to be costly, but also this conflict is going to divert us from real issues that needs to be addressed. Right now in France, in Britain, and so forth, we are being played by these politicians and media, and for illusion that is going to lead to death and destruction for all of us.
And we do know that this presidential election, lots of the candidates have gone really far right, as some would argue, and we'll keep an eye on what is happening with that presidential election, which happens the first stage.
But it's not, Mohammed, it's not just there. I mean, look at Britain. Conservative Party and the Liberal Party and Labour Party, they all have gone to that level of intolerance and so forth. But
they're not passing this sort of legislation where they're closing down mosques and they are forcing people to change how they read the Quran and how they practice their faith. It's really bad in France. Can't compare what's going on there to here.
In France has always been bad, but the fact is this: we are going in the same direction. This nationality bill is going to make my children, your children, and grandchildren, and so forth, insecure and second-class citizens. I actually urge everyone to come to the demonstration, which is on this Sunday, not just for our community, but for everyone, because this sort of conflict, this sort of different class of citizenship, different class of sort of dealing on the issues of due process and judiciary and so forth, will destroy the fabric of this society and then drag us into fascism and so forth. We are going that direction. France is much advanced, but unfortunately, you see, one of the things that I complain about is that we Muslims, we seem to have a short vision and short memory. We see what happens and we get very worked up, be it Trojan horse or be it the Islamophobia in this party, that party. But after a few weeks and few months, it's like we push the reset button. We forget about this. Then we go to the issue of India and we get worked up. We forget about it. We go to the issue of China. We forget about it. Palestine, we forget about it. We are not connecting these dots together to see what direction we are going. The direction that we are going in France or Britain or United States or Canada or Germany might be slightly forward or behind, but the direction is a very dangerous direction, and we need to tackle this on that level. These are not isolated incidents. These are not misunderstandings. What's happening in India is not just about hijab. We got Hindutva and the BJP are training and organizing themselves to actually ethnic cleanse and then create a super Hindu nationalism. We need to rise up to these challenges for our sake and for the sake of our future generation.
There's so much more we wanted to talk about. Let's just talk a bit about the Middle East. We talked about human rights, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Turkey, and the double standards that are often applied. What's your reaction to that?
Well, look, I think as a human rights campaigner, I know human rights abuses take place everywhere, in Britain and in Middle East, and unfortunately the totalitarian regimes of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and so forth. We have seen and we have been campaigning for the human rights, at the time of sort of army rule in Turkey, in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, and the reality is that what is important is having people to stand up and when abuse is taking place, to address that and to try to bring a change. The difficulty comes when sort of politically the West and those champions of democracy and human rights actually use human rights as a tool, as a stick against their opponent, and they reward their supporters. Look, Saudi Arabia, we did a report, which I believe up to this date is the only report identifying the number of political prisoners. This is sort of going back, I think it was 2012. But we identified 80,000 political prisoners in Saudi Arabia. At the height of Soviet Union, Amnesty International said that there were 80,000 political prisoners in the whole of the Soviet Union. This is outrageous. This is actually embarrassing. We know since then people have been sort of assassinated, like Khashoggi and others, and even the way they're treating their fellow royal family. Now, we need to stand up with this sort of abuses. If it's avoided, if it's hidden, if it's sort of ignored, then it will create a much bigger problem for people who live under those authorities. And we need to stand up. We really need to stand up. We need to, as the Quranic verse says, we need to stand up against injustice for the rich, for our friends, against even ourselves. And because if we don't, then we are responsible in nurturing a system which will abuse everyone.
Okay, I want to say thank you so much, Masood, for being so kind with all the time that you've given us tonight. I thought it was a really powerful interview, so thank you so much. Keep yourself and your family safe. Much love. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was Masood Shadjareh, who is the chair and the founder of Islamic Human Rights Commission, based in London, joining us from there. Thank you so much to him, and also thank you to Imam Jamal Rahman. Fascinating discussion that we had tonight. We'll be back next week at the same time, 8:30. And we've got the big countdown to Ramadan. It will be here before you know it. We'll talk more about Ramadan in weeks to come. But take care. Have a great weekend. Whatever you do, keep safe. From me and all the team behind the scenes, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.